I'm recording. Well, welcome all, and Monday morning. Um, Usually morning meetings I'm not very excited about getting up for, but I'm always like, it's time to talk with people. So great to have everybody here. If this is your first time, welcome to the Zoom laboratory that's been going on now for a couple of months. Just folks coming in to get information, share expertise, commiserate, get inspiration, support, all of those kinds of things. This is recorded, so you can listen to it later. And the way that the structure goes is I just share what our congregation did as a jumping off point and learnings and all of that. And then today I want to talk about a couple of things. First, I want to talk about streaming just a little bit and get some information from you all and sharing about how your streaming is going. I see every Sunday in the Facebook group how much Facebook is not working. And just want to get a sense of how it's working for everyone. It feels like it might not be worth it, but we're not streaming. We may start streaming to YouTube this summer, but wanted to know, get a little bit of feedback on how that's been going for you all, because it seems like we get a lot of folks letting us know. And then I want to talk a little bit about equipment, and folks have been asking me a little bit about what I'm using and what I have used. So we'll do that. And then I want to talk about some updates and things that are going to be going on over the summer as we're moving into a different season, actual nature season. So again, ask questions in the chat room. Would love for you to introduce yourselves. I've asked Geoff, Jeffrey, Joanna, and Andrew to co-host today, so they have co-hosting powers. And we trust that you will mute and unmute yourself when asked. And we use the raise hand feature during the Q&A. So I'll just call on you and you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask questions and give comments later. But use the chat room. The chat room is really very, very active. So introduce yourselves. If you do say anything today, we just remind people if they could introduce themselves. If you want to give your pronouns, that would be awesome. And then where you're serving. So there you go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Again, if you're new here, I'm the pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. I've been here about a year, but have been doing online community in some form for the past decade plus. And so grateful that this is a community that was able to roll with me. I had very little anxiety about doing this, but we've kept it very, very simple. We don't do a lot of the things that many folks are doing. So let me show you as our things have evolved. So we start at 9:55, 9:30, everybody gathers together. We pray. We have about 12 to 13 people who are now involved in the service. We just added greeters to our list of worship leaders. So those are the folks that are particularly tasked with greeting people in the chat room, making sure folks are feeling welcome. We do have tech deacons who have all the links and all that, but we have a couple of greeters now that we're playing with, how they will welcome people into the community. And then at 9:55, our organist begins from his apartment and does a prelude for about 5 minutes. And then all during that time, they get this front slide, just asking them to introduce themselves and letting them know we're gonna start in a few minutes. Then I do some announcements. Welcome, folks. We are shifting into the understanding that our community is now no longer as geographically bound as it was. We have people who have returned, some new people who will never be permanent residents of our geographic area again. So we're beginning to shift our language and our conversations around a community that's no longer bound by geography. We don't know where that's going to go, but that's kind of our cultural shift that we've been making. I remind people about our weekly gatherings that happen and to invite them to our email list. And then we've started doing kind of 4 main announcements, just so we can give just like on Sundays when you gather, you give some more backing. We have a film group that meets. We're doing a book group. If you haven't read this book, I'm about a quarter way through. It's really, really good. We have an intersectional reads book group. Our church is going to participate in the March on Washington on the 20th of June. And then we're doing a webinar with Jack Jenkins. Some of you know Jack for his new book at the end of the month. So we really have begun to lean into this. Our adult ed has just said we are now an electronic church and we're going to be there for a while. And so how do we begin to do some of those things a little more intentionally. We did breakout groups. So the first time, I know some of you have been doing coffee hour and breakout groups for a while, but we just did it for the first time this Sunday. I'll tell you a little bit how that went. I do my reminders about Zoom just every time, just to make sure that we remember some of the basics around Zoom. We make sure that we do give a disclaimer about recording, and then just a bunch of other things. Always, this last line about it will not be perfect was clear today or yesterday when we were on. I'll tell you about that. And then I just walk through the service. We do not do a bulletin. We just kind of let folks know here's where we're headed, and kind of guide them through. Do a centering chime, opening prayer. We rotate that between our parish associates. Then we do a hymn. Then I do a confession with an elder or member of the church, someone, and we just do the one and many, myself and that person. All right, then we do our forgiveness same way. Then we do a reveal, and this is the kind of cacophony of everybody scrolling and saying hello and peace and all those kind of things. So we do that. We do a big reveal, and then I come back, do a scripture reading, or liturgist does a scripture reading. And then we've been asked, it's interesting, I've been asked to do a little bit more sermon time. So went a little longer this time, but we do a chat room question, which I had huge typos this week. And so do a chat room question, and then just go right into sermon. There you go. There's sermon stuff. And I really focus this week on what are we building? What's the cornerstone for the future of the church? Which is an interesting question for all of us these days. All right. We do a hymn. Somebody asked us last week, or told us, gosh, the hymns always seem to match the sermons, and our music person and I were like, almost like we plan things. Anyway, all right, we do offering this week. So we've been trying to bring in at least twice a month folks from outside our geographic area to come in and share some of the ministry that's happening, and then we try to support them in some way. So we brought in a friend of mine, Christine Thompson, who's the executive director of Calvary Women's Services in DC, and came in, just zoomed in for 2 or 3 minute, letting us know. We share the links in the chat room. We'll share them this week as part of our ongoing follow-up from worship. And that was really good just to have a different perspective of something that's happening in another part of the country. And then we have been doing special music, having a mix of guests from outside and around the country to our own folks. This is a young person who's an amazing trumpet player who played for us this Sunday. We do our prayers of the people. I remind everybody about the prayers. We use the hand raising. Alex, one of our tech deacons, rotates with another person to call on folks and unmute them. So we do, nobody can unmute themselves. So so Alex does that. And then we also look for people actually physically raising their hands, just because not everybody, when you have a family and they're watching it on their TV screen or whatever, they can't always get to the hand raise thing. So we do kind of a hybrid of hand raise in the chat room. Yesterday, Alex said, if you could paint your hand blue, that would help. But so that's what we do with prayers of the people, then I reveal. And then the rest of it we go through and we do with the prayers of the people, communion, charge, and benediction. That is all face-to-face. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. And there was worship. We actually go about an hour, which doesn't seem like long. An hour goes really fast. I know some folks are shortening up, which is fine as well. So a couple of things that happened to us this Sunday. I have 12 co-hosts, which allows them to share their screen even when other people are not allowed to share their screen. So just keep in mind, co-hosts, even if you have it set where other people beside the host can't share, co-host can. So we saw one of our members email for about 4 minutes before he realized that he was sharing his screen. And we're all like typing in the chat room, your screen's on, you're sharing your screen. We're texting him. And so anyway, so that's, I did not realize that, which makes sense, but co-hosts can share their screen even if you have it set to have others not. And then we also did the coffee hour, which was great. For some of you know that I'm a huge Chromebook supporter. I love Chromebooks. I've been a Chromebook person since they began. our family, because we're out here. We're tester family for Chromebooks. But Zoom is highly, highly limited on a Chromebook. And so if you begin to expand this, so I'm getting a Mac, which going back to my Mac life, which has been about a decade or so, because there's certain things you can't do on a Chromebook. The background changing thing, not as big of a deal, but you can't do that on a Chromebook. You can't, I can't get to original sound on my Chromebook if I wanted to do original sound. So others can. I can set all those. And there's a lot of limitations around the breakout rooms for Chromebook. So I'm going back to a Mac, so we'll be able to use it. So Chromebooks are fine for very basic. Like I've been running on a Chromebook this whole time, so they're perfectly fine. But if you're going to be the main kind of DJ on all this, and you're a Chromebook person and you want to start doing breakout groups, you either need to give that responsibility to someone else who has a Mac or a PC, because I can't do things. We went into our breakout groups, and I can't do any kind of countdowns. I just can turn them off and on, and I can do one broadcast, and that's it. And it doesn't even show up very well. So in any case, but our coffee hours went really, really, really well. So I think some of you have been doing it. You've probably already experienced the joy of the coffee hour. We just did it for 15 minutes, left people wanting a little bit, but we thought it was good just to try it that way. But otherwise, service went pretty well. Very few technical glitches this time. I know that they're just going to always be, things that are going to happen on and on and on. I always think about the parachuting story about most accidents that happen with people who are skydivers, are folks who are experts, and because we get a little bit kind of not lazy, but we just kind of assume things. I think that's going to begin to happen for many of us too. We just we're not quite as disciplined, and so we got to keep on that for the technology stuff. All right, questions. Let's start it up. If you have any questions, raise your hand or thoughts about anything at this point, and then I want to talk about Facebook streaming for just a little bit to get some feedback on people and what is going on with folks. So questions just right off the bat. And remember, if you're first time here, you can ask questions in the chat room. You can ask them out loud. There are no better or worse. There are some total more geeky techno people on this call than I, who are diving deep into everything, and others are just starting out. So feel free. All right, looking for hands. If there's anyone?
So Bruce, one of the first questions that popped up in the chat is, how did your session vote?
Oh, yes.
So you might want to give a backstory.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of background. So last week I shared that our session was going to meet on last Monday night, and talk about our future with two significant decisions to make. One was when we were going to officially think about coming back together. Like many of your spaces, I mean, I think Alabama actually opened up, and there's no limits now anymore. And if any of you are in Alabama, apparently everybody can now worship together. There are no limitations. But for us in California, we are extended through May. I know it's same as others. But I and some of us were feeling pretty captive to this month to month. And when the reality was that we were not going to gather in any significant way, probably, I don't think it's going to be until next Easter. If I had to kind of really think about this, our elders have been telling us that they're not coming back. Like they've just kind of said, we're not going to come back unless we are really very, 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 very sure that we're going to be safe. I don't blame them at all. We also know that the main thing people are missing from worship was singing. And so we had to talk about the realities. If you're going to sing in church, we know that Germany has banned singing in church, that you're now at like 20-foot separation. Like they're talking about, and when you go map out your gathering space, whether it's a multi-purpose room or a sanctuary or whatever it is, when you start putting 20 feet in between people, you're talking about, in our sanctuary that seats 220-ish, we're probably talking 18 people max that are going to be able to fit in there. So that was another thing we began to talk about. And so we kind of said, let's think about the realities of this. And so we have another meeting next week, next Wednesday, our official session meeting, where we will vote on, my guess is we're going to say 2021. So we did a first read and conversation, really helpful on Monday, that we're going to just not even contemplate anything until 2021. The idea is that frees up program staff, my program staff, like we have a lot, me and our music person, our program committees, to do work thinking about this long term, so that we're no longer kind of like, well, when or during this time, but we're actually thinking about a cultural shift. And that was the second conversation we had, was about throwing out this idea that we are in some ways centered around where we are geographically, but we're no longer going to see ourselves as geographically bound. And my question was to them was, can we have a member join who's visited, who will never live in Palo Alto or physically come to this congregation? And folks are like, sure. So I was like, okay, well, so what does that mean for us as we begin to think about program? What does worship look like? How do we welcome people? What assumptions are we making? All those kinds of things. So my guess is both of those are going to be officially adopted in a couple of weeks. Yeah, a week from Wednesday. So that we will we will say that barring any scientific breakthroughs, that allow us to no longer social distance, we will not be looking at in-person events until 2021. And that we are going to take a culture shift to think about ourselves as being non-geographic, centered in Palo Alto, being non-geographic. So that's kind of where we ended. We had some elders that were like, let's just say Easter. And I'm like, I'm not sure the rest of the congregation is ready to hear the words Easter. But I think intellectually, folks realize that it is going to be a long time. I'm going to share in our Facebook group, there was a webinar done here at Stanford with 4 musicians who are teachers and talking about the future of performing and singing. And they're thinking a couple of years until folks are going to be able to gather again, which was really sobering for our choir as they watched it. And that's going to be everyone. I mean, I think this is, we understand this, the intellectual scientific part about it, but it's really hard for people. So we're going to begin to explore ways to sing together, and we're going to maybe use a cappella and some other things that I know folks have been using to try to do something. So anyway, there's where we are. Thank you, Geoff, for asking. All right. Questions, thoughts, anybody want to jump in? Let's, I'm not seeing any hands raised about anything, unless you have any questions for any new folks or anything, but let's talk. Lynn, go ahead. I'll unmute you. Go for it.
Hi, first time on here from Great Falls, Montana.
Welcome.
United Church of Christ, our UCC church in Billings was Zoom bombed last week. And then I saw another, and they admittedly were not doing a lot of the safety precautions,
right.
But I saw on another Facebook group here just this morning that there was another church in, I can't remember where it was, that has been doing all of the precautions, and they were still bombed yesterday.
Okay.
Any thoughts? I mean, they were doing separate invitation, admitted through the waiting room, had it monitored, and there was still somebody that they were able to shut it down within seconds, but still, when it's child pornography, seconds is huge.
Yes.
Thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll welcome some other thoughts on this. We did see in the Facebook group, Deb Avery, who's a friend with some of ours, also was bombed. And the way that it happened, it looks like for them was somebody got a hold of a member's email, because they had been very clear about just getting it to members and having them register and do the whole thing. So that appears how they got it. I think for us, we've done everything. Like at the beginning, many of us were not locking down. We were just like, we just chose to try and keep it as possible, and then gradually. So now I am of is every lockdown procedure we could possibly do, that's what we're doing. And so I don't know how people are still getting in if we're doing registrations that are specific and unique, because if they click on a unique registration, it will show up with that person's name, with the registrar's name. So that's one way to check to see how they actually got in. Now, if somebody goes through the trouble of registering themselves and then planning on Zoom bombing, and I don't know what we can do about that. I mean, I really do. I don't know if there's a way other than you need to recognize every single person that's coming into your worship. That's your only way, which is a huge amount of work. We're looking at 80 to 100, 110 people with us not knowing who are visitors and who are not, and there's no way to chat with somebody while they're in the waiting room. So you're trying to figure out if that would be a great feature, right? Is if you could chat while somebody's in the waiting room to be able to say, hey, I don't know what you would even ask them, because if somebody has taken that much effort to try to Zoom bomb you, they're going to figure out a way to get in. So I think if you've taken all the precautions, so we're going to send a reminder out to our folks just around this email piece, just to say, remember that it's a unique thing. Please don't forward this to people. But I'm not sure what else we're going to be able to do other than you decide you're not doing online worship. I don't know what the next step is. I hope we can figure that out. But from what I gather from this last one, now if people siphon off emails, they'll have that unique address. But if it's a unique link through a registration, it will show up as the person who registered name. So that's one way to know. The other thing is to go through, if it was a registered person, to go through and generate a report of your registered attenders for that Sunday, and that's in the settings in your main Zoom account, where you can generate a report of all the emails and people who were in that meeting. So. Yeah, I mean, I know it's gotten less. We have not seen it as much, but with Deb and now you're sharing with us, Lynn, a couple of those things happening. I think we're going to have to look at this again and see what we're going to do. I know some folks have dropped Zoom and are trying to move to other platforms, but I kind of feel like other platforms are going to always have their issues too, and I can't imagine trying to move our 150 people who have gotten used to Zoom, trying to move them to Hangouts or anything else. So, all right. Go ahead and jump in if you have some thoughts or comments about any of this. You won't need to raise your hand. Just unmute yourself and introduce yourself and share any comments you have about the Zoom bombing.
I have a question, Bruce. Kristen Randberg here in New York City.
Okay. Go ahead. Go for it.
The question is around land call-ins and registration. Is that possible? Has anyone done it? Landline call-ins and registration. I do not have experience with that. Anyone have experience with landline registration? If you have experience, just unmute and answer.
We don't have landline. It's Judy Brandon, Greenewalds in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We don't actually have landline registration, but we have been doing very intensive identification of the people as they join. We start at 10 o'clock to let people into the room, and worship doesn't start until 10:30. And our socialization takes place before the service. So as soon as people are admitted, we put them in a breakout room from the very beginning. It limits the scope of any possibility, the numbers of people that would be involved in of inappropriate sharing of stuff, by having just a maximum of 4 or 5 people in the regular meeting room as they're being admitted. So that's what we've been doing.
Oh, that's interesting. So you do the breakouts before.
We do.
That's fascinating. I mean, that certainly could limit that. We didn't have everybody so now that they're used to it, so I assume everybody goes ahead and they know that's coming.
They do.
If they don't want to do it, though, let's say your stragglers, your 10, 25 people, Do they get into a room and then are just admitted, or at a certain point everybody just gets in?
We put them in a room right up. Yesterday, I put the last person in a room at 10:29.
Okay. And then you stop the room at 10:30 and go right in.
Exactly.
Okay. I've not heard that. Thank you, Judy. All right. Interesting. Everybody's like, huh. I can see faces like, huh.
Our people were used to doing socialization before worship, so it made it intuitive and easier to do the conversion.
Great. Thank you. All right. Other thoughts on the bombing piece? Has anybody had experience with that or had to figure that out?
Not as much experience, Bruce, but what caught my attention about the report from Deb yesterday was the shift in use of not screen sharing, but just using the camera to show inappropriate, sexually explicit, whatever. That was the first time I've ever heard that done. So, all the previous reports were folks getting in, and because folks had not set up a lockdown around screen sharing, folks had been screen sharing videos or photos. But this one was somebody who just used their camera input to not somehow, I know how. You can, in Zoom, you can say, I want to show something from a different camera source. And but that's the first report I've ever heard of that.
Yeah. One of the settings that I just changed on our church account, but not on my personal, is to no longer let people use their profile pictures as well. So that when you turn off your video, you won't see a profile picture. It'll just be the person's name. And because we also did hearing about folks using their profile picture as the pornography. So, so if they don't turn on their video, which we don't, ours is defaulted to not turn on, then the pictures could still be there. So on my church accounts, we turn that feature off so that the profile picture is no longer the default for video off. It's just the person's name. So that's another way people have been bombing. I think we're gonna have to watch out for this. If there is now a way that folks have developed some kind of hacking to be able to get into registration emails, or if it's just kind of some folks not guarding those as well as maybe we need to remind them to do. I think that'll be the key. But yeah, apparently Deb's was bad, so really bad for their congregation. So, and she's at a fairly large church in comparison to a lot of places. So yeah, I hope she's doing okay. All right, other thoughts or questions on the bombing that possibly folks might have? All right, let's talk about, I want to move to Facebook, to sharing and streaming, Facebook in particular, but also let's talk a little bit about streaming. And I know some of you are using like high-tech kind of stuff in the Facebook group. I always watch these like total nerd out like threads that begin that are so awesome and hilarious to me, because like people are in their element now with some of this stuff. I'm looking at you, Andrew. So
I don't understand most of it either, Bruce. I feel like I want to have T-shirts made that say "Keep it simple." Like I am not doing a lot of that.
Is that only so your leadership can see that? I don't know if Anne's on this call today, but is that when your leadership like, can you do this? Can you do this?
Some of the stuff that folks are going into is like makes me think it's like television production, like cable access network type of stuff, and I'm like, no, I don't have time to figure that stuff out.
Right. All right. So I'm going to ask, how many of you, or do you want to share about kind of your Facebook streaming experiences, how you've fixed them? Are you still doing them? Are you anybody? Go ahead and share, because we see a lot of Facebook streaming, Facebook Live fails, and we may just hear of just the fails, which I want to be aware of, that it may work for a lot of people, but it's not making me think that that's where we're headed next. So thoughts, questions, or thoughts on how that's being handled for you all?
Yeah,
Anyone?
This is Joanna. I'm in Rochester Hills, Michigan. and the associate, but also the tech person. So I'm low tech. I have my Mac and I have a second screen, and we are Zooming worship and Facebook streaming. I have found that I get on just because of my own anxiety about 20 minutes early, because I can set it all up, and we've had no issues except yesterday to get started. We had a glitch when Zoom crashed yesterday, but it came all back up within a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and we were back up streaming and both synced about the same time. So
Right.
We tried the custom link, and I've noticed that I tend to re-enter it, even though it seems to be the exact same numbers as the previous week. So just for my own sanity. But we're catching more people doing both. We don't have a huge amount of overlap.
Okay, great. Other Facebook Live. Now I know that if you're recording and you premiere it, that's one thing, right? I assume that there aren't as many glitches with that, but it's when you're doing it live. Is Sarah Stone? Yeah, Sarah Stone Boylan is on. You have any? I'd love to invite Sarah just to share it. Introduce yourself, what you're doing, and then if you have any thoughts on the Facebook streaming stuff.
Hey there. My name's Sarah Stone Boylan. I'm the digital missioner at Virginia Theological Seminary, which is an Episcopal seminary in Alexandria, Virginia. I wasn't actually expected to be called on, so I'm like, what are we talking about? Facebook Live, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So what the kind of the glitches? That's okay. Busted. Kind of the glitches and things that are going on. How have you seen that been happening well or not well? Are there any technical things that would be worth sharing?
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that crash question. So there are like a few hacks around it. I put it in quotations of taking the streaming code and adding it onto Facebook. So not like making them talk to each other, but saying now like, or not assuming that the streaming will work from one to the other, but saying, okay, these are the two pieces that you need to know in order to talk to each other. And so that happened right around Easter. That seemed to be the issue. And so that's, when I've tried it, I have about a 50% success rate. And so I don't know if it's more successful in webinars versus meetings. I haven't yet sort of like been able to distill that down. Joanna, what's your experience been with webinar versus a meeting?
Webinars seem to work much better than meetings.
Okay.
Just my experience at this point. But our church is not streaming our meetings because I just, again, the simple piece, the less amount of possible glitches in technology I'm always trying to avoid. But other folks thinking about your Facebook piece, if you're thinking about going there or even YouTube, I mean, what do you have any questions for those that are doing it well? Any other thoughts from people who have been doing the streaming to either Facebook, and even let's look at YouTube if folks are going live there.
The only thing I was going to share, Bruce, is that so for the first 2-3 weeks, I had no problems with using the feature to be able to stream through our Facebook page. And then right around the time the security adjustments were made by Zoom is when that kind of handshake seemed to break. Mm-hmm. And but even in those weeks, we still could stream. I just couldn't to the page. I could only send it to my personal account. And then I was streaming worship through my personal account. And then I could go to the page and reshare the live feed from my account to the page. Then about 3 weeks ago, everything just started working again. So it kind of shocked me yesterday because there was a big Zoom software update that I was scared to install, and I kept on saying no, later. This is on Saturday, and then finally I was like, you know what, I should just install it, test, and then see what happens. But even after that, we've 3 weeks in a row now have been able to send the feed to the page without any bugs like I used to get for those. Did you
get a ton of new friend requests, Andrew?
I will say that
Andrew Yeager Buckley.
The weeks where worship was shared through my personal account, it's not about me, but we all know that there's a major difference between live content that's streamed through personal versus pages, and the amount of folks that you can connect to pages are hidden, that you don't get as much of notifications that go out to your followers. And so those weeks, our view counts higher and more. And friends of mine from Jersey, I mean, I think we must have had 25% Catholics from Jersey that joined us that week. But there is something to be said. They really messed with the ability for pages to really connect with followers like 5 years ago, and ever since then it kind of stinks.
Right. Okay. Well, great. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. And for you can think about, that's an interesting thing though, right? If you're using your Facebook page, your personal one, as your church page, for some of our smaller churches where you're really, maybe that's the way, maybe you do drive it through your personal Facebook. I mean, those are decisions and divisions you'll have to make for you. But if you notice your Facebook page is simply not getting the people, maybe doing it through your personal would be an interesting dynamic to do. So thank you, Andrew. All right. Others that I know some of you all are also doing it. Now, there's a service I know some of you are using called OBB or something that helps to do the tech. OBS. Thank you. Is that what it is? Somebody just unmuted themselves, and I'm not going to find that person. All right. Any other questions around streaming or thoughts around streaming? Go Marty and then Brian.
So I would say that I concur with Andrew. We had that one glitch of that week where we had to run it through a personal page and then to the Facebook.
And Marty, where are you serving?
Savannah, Georgia.
Thank you.
And so we found that, but the last several weeks, it's just been an automatic thing. We just go stream to Facebook and it just goes. And the reason we continue to do it is because it compresses the file when it records it. And then later we can update it or upload it to our website. And it's real simple because we are not techie people. It's just myself and the pastor, and so we're winging it. But it compresses the file, and then we're able to upload it to, and we get extra folks that watch it. Some of our congregation members prefer to watch it. They will connect it to their televisions at home and watch it at home, and that's easier than going through the Zoom links. Yeah. So seems to work for us.
Well, now it's pastor, you, and you can just develop an IT department. Everybody should just put director of IT on their business cards and bios. Brian Franzen, San Jose, what's up?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of bandwidth. So, because
wait, personal or technological?
Technological.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I have a church that seats 700. And we usually have less than 100 there, so we'll be able to go back before others. And we already know that when we go back, we're only going to have 25 people. So we're looking at doing things where we can put on our monitors the Zoom, and so we're doing the Zoom on the monitors and basically broadcasting at the same time. My question is, for those who have done it, have you had bandwidth issues? Do you need to up your bandwidth to be able to both be showing it and recording or doing it? Have anybody had issues like that? Or
anyone? Has anybody been, had anybody started to try? I mean, I'm always a proponent of get as fast as you can. I mean, I don't know if they're doing fiber out to you yet.
Yeah, we can do gig line.
Okay, then I would totally do that. In San Francisco, we had fiber, but I moved out to the burbs now, and they're never going to have fiber out here, surprisingly, because it's just not dense enough. So I would say yes. And so that's a great, not segue, but just a thing. So I'm going to start another Facebook group called Hybrid Church or Hybrid Faith. I don't know what we can call it. That are going to talk about that specifically, because I want to look at what does it mean for us to actually see ourselves, not just as we're here in worship and folks get to watch us do it, but what does it mean for us to really build an interactive space that is combined between live, in person, and people that are outside and are not visiting there, rather than it's just we can, I'm going to watch it while this is going on, and maybe the pastor occasionally makes an acknowledgement that people are watching from other places. But how do you genuinely create as much interaction between people that are at home? Because we're going to have seniors, and we're going to have seniors who are going to say to us, we're not coming back, but we still want to participate in worship. So I will say, I don't think any of my folks are on here, but this is recorded. And I think you're talking about possibilities of configuring your worship space now, right? You can use this distancing piece. Now you're a sanctuary. I've been to Brian's sanctuary. You're on a slope though, which
we're a theater.
Yeah, which is going to make it hard. Ours is flat. So, I mean, I'm just thinking, gosh, what an opportunity to reconfigure a sanctuary to become more communal. And then you integrate in technology to allow people who are at home and people who are there to feel like they're in the same space. So I think that's the next question for many folks, because I suspect that a lot of people are just not going to come back, even if they can.
Yeah, we've been told. Our session kind of came back, and we figure we'll have about 20 to 30 people in worship, with the bulk of people that'll still be home, because our congregation isn't old, but we have a lot of our families have kids that are vulnerable, and some of our adults are kind of in that vulnerable category, and a lot of asthma and other stuff that is, and they're not going to come until there's a vaccine, and they be upfront.
That's great. I mean, I think having these questions, these conversations with your leadership are really important. This is a little sidebar. So I asked 5 questions to our session to help us think about this. And I'll share these in the Facebook group. I asked, what have we learned about ourselves during this time? I asked, what have we lost? And to give some grieving time. What have we gained? How has COVID-19, how has it impacted how we meet as a community? And then what are the possibilities that God is unfolding before us? And that seemed to let folks really lean into this idea about being church differently and acknowledging, Brian, like you were sharing, the variety of people that have been impacted by this. Also we haven't been able to connect with, but also this amazing kind of new connections with people, and then launched them into this. So what does this mean? Like, what are the real possibilities for this congregation into the future? And I think that has allowed the folks I'm serving to think about church just so much broadly and more and differently than we could have ever programmed or planned for. Like, this would have never worked if I had to convince folks of things. So I think there's huge potential in the future about how we're going to be being and doing church. So anyway, sidebar. All right, I want to move to. Oh, go for it. Yep.
I put a question in the chat, and I just wanted to. My name is Michelle. I'm a pastor in Baltimore City.
Hey,
I had 2 questions. One was about the 20-page document from the PCUSA that came out last week about worship guidelines. And I know that my people aren't going to read 20 pages right now before a session meeting.
I didn't read it.
And right. And then I read the Outlook article about it, and I didn't find it helpful for session interpretation. I found it helpful in regards to some, more informative stuff, but it was less analytical. So I was wondering if anyone has any ideas about this, about how to. My staff is going to try to create a Cliff Notes version of this.
Gosh, please share that with people.
But before I take that on, is there anyone else who is doing that too, so we can crowdsource this together?
That might be a good thing to lift up in the Facebook group, just to kind of get some folks thinking about that. So, not surprisingly, folks, I mean, this is all denominations, but we try to wordsmith our way out of everything and try to figure it out. And there are good, these are smart, theologically grounded. These are folks this is what they're called to. So it's not but I think sometimes we lose that connection to how do we translate that to who we are on the ground. So I will admit, Michelle, thank you for asking the question. I've not read it. I don't think I even saw it. I don't know. Now I'm gonna have to go look for it. And for those of you that are not Presbyterian, it's doubly funny. So I was the moderator of our church, which is a big deal for Presbyterians at some level. So the fact that I have no idea that even came out is telling about me, I guess. Michelle, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but I do think we do have to begin to think as leadership more thoughtfully about why we're doing things and with the implications of that, combined with risking and doing stuff. So, I mean, I think communion was a great example, right? The first things that came out of our General Assembly offices was wait, don't do it. And clearly there were those of us that were doing it. And eventually that shifted. And so I think there may be my guess will be there's a first run out and then they'll come back to it. The hard part right now for our denomination is we are planning our General Assembly that happens in about 6 weeks. And so they're probably incredibly overwhelmed with that kind of world. Very unhelpful for me, I'm sure, Michelle, but thank you for asking the question. Put that in the Zoom Facebook group. It'd be great to see what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do that.
And any cliff notes to kind of get that drilled down so session could absorb it and actually get to the meat of it would be really, really helpful. So if anybody wants to get that going and work on it, that'd be great. We can share that out, folks. Thanks, Michelle. I'm bummed we're not going to be in Baltimore.
My question was about YouTube Live.
Yes.
I was talking with my staff last week about how we don't want to lose the participatory experience of being a non-geographic church during this season. And we are thinking about moving entirely to YouTube Live once we're allowed to be back in the worship space, even if it's just 20 to 30 people. And I was wondering if anyone has experience having someone on staff who's like the digital tech pastor during worship, who monitors chat and prayer requests on a laptop during worship, who's not the sound engineer, because we can't have the sound person doing both.
Can't you just do it all? Can't you just do the slides, the choir, the sound, and
That's right.
Everything else? All right. Thank you. That's a great question. Folks using YouTube Live, any thoughts how you've done that? Just go ahead and jump in, unmute and jump in.
I would commend Jim Keat at Riverside Church. I think his title is digital minister.
Yeah.
There's also another guy who's connected with Jim, and I think his name is Aussie Dave. There we go. It took me a second. And he's based in a non-denominational church outside of Atlanta, and he is all about like engagement through YouTube, both while live and then afterwards as well.
Yeah.
I'll drop links in.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Jim Keat is UCC, I think, and so theologically, right there, I think where many folks are in terms of mainline progressive denominations. I think the more evangelical churches have been in this space a lot longer than many of us. So I think that's where we're going to find colleagues to help us think through these things and have to kind of translate if there's any theological kind of space that you need to shift. But I don't get a sense that there is going to be a lot of kind of that question. I think we're talking about the technical ways and some of the structures and some of that. And so I think that's where we'll get more of our expertise. I mean, we're all playing with it and moving into it so we can help support and give help and guidance, but there are folks that are much further out around all of this. So I know there's been digital ministers or ministers of digital ministry pastor of digital ministry for a long time in a lot of churches. So maybe doing just some searches around what are their responsibilities probably is a good first step. And again, we may have some in some Presbyterian circles. I don't know of many if we do, or in other denominations if you have those, and maybe in some big churches you might have them. But again, sorry, Michelle, can't give you any huge help on that either. But I'm bummed, Michelle, we're not going to be in Baltimore live with you all for General Assembly. So thank you for any work that you all have done to help the Presbyterians get ready to go to Baltimore. But we will not be able to be there with you all. So, all right, let me move on our last 10 minutes.
Bruce, you've got a couple people who've had their hands up for quite a while.
Oh, I am. I'm sorry. My bad. How about we'll go Megan and then Rob.
I'm Megan Close. I'm interim at Christ Presbyterian in Fairfax, Virginia, and we have a very small congregation. I've got about 55 in worship in person, and a lot of elderly. And we've been doing Zoom worship. I have 3 people. I'm the only staff, so I don't have any staff. I'm doing everything myself. And I have 3 volunteers from the congregation who are co-hosts, which consists of admitting people from the waiting room and muting and reading the chat. Yesterday I was off, and so a couple from the congregation led worship talking about their trip to Cuba. When I run worship, I'm using PowerPoint, and so they were trying to use PowerPoint, and the co-host couldn't do it. They were frustrated with trying to do PowerPoint and lead worship for the first time and all of that. And so I've just gotten to the point where I don't have the capacity to continue live worship.
Yeah.
So I want to move to pre-recorded worship, but prayers and joys and concerns is like the heart of our worship. So I'm wondering about how to move the congregation from a frustrating but live experience to a less anxiety-provoking pre-recorded service, but still provide an opportunity for the interaction.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and for most of our congregations in the Presbyterian, and I think UCCs are small congregations, right? And most it's just one person who is now the IT department and having to do everything. So Megan, for your ministry and energy there, thank you on behalf of your community. So I've always said that one is not better than the other. Live streaming, pre-recording, Zoom, one is not better than. You have to translate that for your context and your energy and capacity. So making the decision to go to a pre-recorded because of capacity is a perfectly faithful, great, decision. So so there are a lot of, I don't know how many folks on here are doing their entire service pre-recorded, but I do have quite a few folks who are doing pre-recorded completely. And there's a couple things they're doing to enhance that is premiering it. So, right, you premiere the service on Facebook or YouTube so that everybody's watching it at the same time. I do have some folks who are uploading it and then just telling people it's uploaded, go ahead and watch it whenever, which gives some flexibility, which I think is a really interesting dynamic for when you come back together. Folks can be like, well, I used to watch worship on Saturday morning and now I got to go back on Sunday or whatever. So pre-recording, I would suggest premiering it just so that you're getting everybody in the space at the same time. That way you can have some interaction that's going on while it's being premiered. The other thing is, I know of quite a few folks who are doing hours right after this premiered services, so that they're like right after it's done, then we hop on Zoom and do coffee hour. So I think there are ways to still capture the interactive piece. It just might be right afterwards. It might be, if you have a lot of folks, the whole thing with the interactivity on a live one, those folks have to be able to be in a chat room or just be, so that limits some of that interaction. But if they're already used to being on Zoom, then just don't be as complicated with Zoom and just have them after the worship is done. Let's hop on for half an hour onto Zoom, and maybe you do breakout rooms or not, but that's when we do our more deeper prayers. That I've seen that seems to be a pretty consistent way to keep the interactive part of the Sunday. Is to just Zoom together right after the service is done. Is that helpful?
Yep.
Great. If there's any other thoughts or comments about that, any other suggestions for Megan or anybody else doing that kind of thing? Great. Rob, go for it. You're next.
So hand up as a while. So jumping back a little bit to what Michelle was saying.
And where are you serving? Where are you from?
Oh, sorry, Rob Dyer, First United Presbyterian in Belleville, around the St. Louis area. And going back to the question about when you get those large documents that we're getting from our different denominations, take you through the 5,000 questions you should have answered. There's no doubt it's a good worksheet to go through, but like most session meetings or church council meetings, that should not really be a working meeting where you're doing that type of work. So like we put together a coronavirus task force, and it's of people who don't mind sitting and reading stuff like that. And then when we come back and just say, so when we have our big session discussion about, well, what should we do about worship? Here's some input that came from our coronavirus task force that read through the 20-page document and has these thoughts to share. That's, we're kind of taking that approach to it. And then the other thing that was brought up about dealing with all the balls you've got to juggle in the midst of Zoom worship, and looking at the chat room and making sure someone isn't putting a picture they shouldn't put it up and all that kind of stuff. Every week we get better and better at my church at delegating. So like this past week, the associate pastor just kind of hung out in that chat room and dealt with someone who was having some issues there, and then also went on and started doing private chat with a family that had just started attending our church a couple weeks ago. And now they've made a connection and they're going to, talk outside of worship. So I think that having people you think of all those things you're juggling and then just find a person for each one of those has been a really great growing thing for our experience. And the last thing is that I'm a former software developer, so I'm loving this techie stuff. And if anybody, if anybody wants to connect or ask questions, I just want to throw myself out there as a resource, because I can finally tell my mama that those electrical engineering degrees are coming in handy again.
All the video games I played too are coming in handy. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Yes, I know. And I appreciate folks who are way into the tech and don't laud it over people. So I appreciate you, Rob, because I think you've been very helpful with all of this, as opposed to folks who are like, oh, it's about time you all get here. Like that, I'm just not having time for that kind of stuff. So thank you all. You who are just totally into this now and are gracious with some of us that are just kind of practitioners and playing and figuring out. We appreciate you. All right, we're almost at the end of our time, but I'm going to look for a post in the Facebook a group around equipment. I'm going to do a blog post around the stuff, kind of baseline, simple, because I think some presbyteries, I don't know if in other denominations, your judicatories are offering you money to be able to upgrade your electronic equipment as you're returning back, because most sanctuaries are not going to be equipped. We want to give some options for people who are doing it in their sanctuary or even at home, just to kind of, we're in this for the long term. And so the more things that we can do that help to heighten the quality, but also make some things easier, I want to offer some of those. So look in the Facebook group. I'll post the questions that I'd shared with our session, as well as some equipment kinds of things. I want to know what people are using. I certainly have my favorites, but want to see what people are using, and I'm going to compile that into a blog post in the next week or so. So the last thing I want to leave you with is we'll do this meeting every week through May, and then when we hit June, we're going to go to twice a month. So I will change that in the Zoom, in the registration, so you all get notification of the dates that's going to happen. But as much as I love meeting with you every week, I don't think we necessarily always have to meet every week. So we'll go twice a month. That means, we'll just miss each other a little bit more and love coming together twice a month. Because I do think this is going to go on a while, and we'll kind of see where it heads. The original plan was just to do this through May, but I feel like obviously we're building some community here. So want to continue that. So starting in June, we'll go twice a month, and that'll get updated on the Zoom registration. All right, all. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Let me also remind folks, as Megan did and I've done, take a Sunday off completely. Figure out a way. Most of us do not know how tired we are until you actually unplug for not just one day, but multiple days, and you don't have to lead worship. So would really encourage you to try to figure out how to do that. For those of you in common time zones, work together and just send your people to each other's worship services. Lots of options to be able to take some time off, but really hope and encourage that you will do that. All right, all. Appreciate you. Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.